The rain began just as Margaret Langley stepped out of the taxi. It wasn't heavy, not yet, just a whisper of water sliding down the pavement, making the city shimmer like glass. She stood for a moment beneath her umbrella, looking up at the tall windows of the club where laughter floated out like music. Inside, she knew. They were all waiting. Her son, his new wife, their friends. They'd chosen this place because it was elegant but not intimidating, the kind of place people took photographs in to prove a point. Margaret had paid for the dinner, of course. It had been presented as a small family celebration, but she knew better. They wanted something from her. They always did. At 72, Margaret moved with deliberate grace. She had learned long ago that dignity could be armor. Her husband, Richard, had been dead for almost 12 years, leaving behind an empire of real estate, art, and old money. It should have been enough to keep everyone content. But greed, she discovered, was like rust, it never slept. It just waited for a quiet corner to spread. As she entered the club, the doorman greeted her by name. "Good evening, Mrs. Langley." His voice was kind, respectful. The sort of respect that came from years of quiet observation. She'd been coming here for decades, since before her hair turned silver, since before her son Thomas had learned to speak in that clipped, dismissive tone that reminded her too much of his father. She smiled faintly. "Good evening, James. I'll find them myself tonight." The dining room was warm and golden, all candlelight and polished wood. At the far end, she saw them, Thomas and his wife, Chloe. They were radiant in that curated, modern way. Two perfect smiles, two eager gestures. When Thomas spotted her, he stood, arms open. "Mother, you're right on time." His voice was smooth, cheerful, a practiced charm. Margaret let him kiss her cheek. He smelled faintly of cologne and ambition. Chloe, tall and sharp-eyed, rose to greet her. "Margaret, you look stunning as always." Her tone was bright, but her eyes flickered briefly toward the string of pearls at Margaret's neck, the same ones her late husband had given her on their 25th anniversary. Margaret noticed. She noticed everything. They sat, menus appearing, glasses filled. Conversation flowed easily at first. Wedding plans, business updates, travel stories. Chloe was talking about a villa in Italy when Thomas leaned closer, lowering his voice just slightly. "Mother, there's something we wanted to discuss with you, actually. Something important." Margaret smiled. "Oh." Her hands remained perfectly still on the table. Chloe reached for her husband's hand, squeezing it as though rehearsed. "It's about the estate," she said carefully. "We've been thinking, with your help, perhaps it's time to simplify things a bit. Maybe transfer management of the holdings to someone younger. Thomas could oversee everything, keep it all organized for you. It would take the stress off." Margaret's eyes lifted to hers. "Come, blue and unreadable. You're suggesting I hand over my life's work to someone else?" "Not hand over," Thomas corrected quickly. "Just delegate. You've done so much already. You deserve peace, Mother. Enjoy your time. Travel, relax." Margaret smiled, didn't falter. "You make it sound like I'm already halfway in the grave." Chloe's laugh was brittle. "Oh no, of course not. We just care about you." Margaret tilted her head slightly, studying them. She could see the hunger behind their polite expressions, the way Thomas's eyes flickered when he mentioned management and simplify. She'd heard that same tone once before, years ago, when her husband had discussed investments that would later destroy people. Thomas had inherited his father's intelligence, but none of his restraint. "Let's discuss it another time," she said finally, her voice soft but final. "Tonight, we should celebrate. You're both looking so well." They smiled, relieved, thinking they'd avoided confrontation. They didn't see the shift in her expression, that subtle narrowing of her eyes, the faintest trace of something colder than disapproval, calculation. Dinner went on, and Margaret played her part beautifully. She asked about their new penthouse, their plans for a foundation in their names, their trip to Paris. She even laughed at Thomas's story about a business deal that had gone wrong. But while they spoke, she studied them. The way Chloe ordered the most expensive wine without looking at the price, the way Thomas checked his phone under the table, the way their smiles disappeared the instant they thought she wasn't watching. By dessert, Margaret had seen enough. When they left the club, she declined Thomas's offer to drive her home. "It's only a short walk, and the rain has stopped," she said. Her son kissed her cheek, distracted. Chloe offered a hollow hug, smelling faintly of rose and envy. Margaret stood on the sidewalk until their car disappeared, the taillights vanishing into the night. Then she turned, and for the first time in months, her expression changed. The softness drained away, leaving something sharper. At home, the house was silent, vast, and lonely in the way old houses often are after too many years. She slipped off her pearls and set them on her dressing table, staring at her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked composed, elegant, but her eyes betrayed the storm beneath. "They think I'm old," she murmured. "They think I'm finished." In her study, she poured a glass of whiskey, Richard's brand, aged and expensive. On the desk lay an unopened envelope, thick with papers. Her lawyer had sent it weeks ago, urging her to finalize her new will. She delayed, not because she didn't know what she wanted, but because she'd been waiting for clarity. Now she had it. She opened the drawer and drew out a small leather-bound notebook. Inside were names, dates, account numbers, details she guarded even from Thomas. Over the years, she had learned to keep her own counsel. Richard's business had taught her that people were loyal only until the money shifted direction. She flipped to a clean page and began to write. Step 1, confirm suspicions. Step 2, control the narrative. Step 3, dismantle trust quietly. Her handwriting was neat, measured. She paused only once, looking toward the window, where the city lights blurred against the rain. For a moment, she thought of the boy Thomas had once been, the one who used to sit on her lap and trace the pearls around her neck, whispering, "You're the prettiest, Mom." A small ache touched her chest. Then it was gone. Over the next few weeks, Margaret moved carefully, invisibly. She invited Thomas and Chloe to tea, to dinners, to family gatherings. She smiled, listened, played the role of a loving mother. But quietly, she began to shift the ground beneath their feet. She contacted her accountant, transferring portions of her estate into trusts under other names. She sold one property, quietly, at a loss that appeared accidental. She updated her will, but not as anyone expected. When her lawyer asked, "Are you sure about this?" she only said, "Quite sure." Meanwhile, she listened. Chloe called often, always cheerful, always asking little questions. "Have you thought about a caretaker, Margaret? It might make things easier. Do you still handle all your own finances?" Margaret answered politely, always vague. Every word she spoke, she weighed. Every conversation, she documented. One afternoon, as she sat in the garden pruning roses, her housekeeper, Anna, came to her looking uneasy. "Mrs. Langley, someone called for you while you were out. A woman named Chloe. She said it was about the insurance policy." Margaret smiled, gentle. "Did she leave a message?" "She said it's urgent, that you should call her before the renewal date passes." Margaret nodded slowly. Insurance. So they were already probing deeper. Good. Let them. It would make what came next easier. That night, Margaret sat at her desk again. The notebook lay open, half filled now. She added a new line. Step 4. Let them show their hand. Then, she picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Arthur," she said when the voice answered. "It's Margaret Langley. I believe I may need your help again." Arthur Collins had been Richard's lawyer for 30 years, a man who had seen the worst of the family's business and had survived it. "Mrs. Langley," he said, his voice slow and measured. "I wondered when you'd call. I assume this has to do with Thomas." Margaret's tone was calm, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "You assume correctly. Then you'll want to come in tomorrow," he said. "We should discuss the contingency plan." Margaret's lips curved slightly. "Yes, Arthur. I believe it's time." She hung up, sat back, and looked at the city lights once more. Somewhere out there, her son was likely celebrating, convinced he was clever enough to outmaneuver her. But Margaret had been forged in a different era, when women survived not by brute strength but by patience, subtlety, and the art of knowing when to strike. And when she struck, it would be silent, surgical, final. The clock ticked softly in the study. The roses outside stirred in the wind. Margaret closed her notebook, placed it gently in the drawer, and whispered to the empty room. "You wanted everything, Thomas. Let's see how much you can hold once I start taking it away." Then she turned off the lamp, leaving the house in quiet darkness, the faint scent of roses still hanging in the air. Chase sounded surprised to hear from me, but polite as always. Evelyn, of course, how are you? It's been ages. I'm well, dear, thank you. Listen, I was hoping you could help me with something small, a surprise for Daniel and Madison. You know how they've been working so hard planning the wedding. I wanted to do something special for them, but I'm terrible at surprises. Could you perhaps tell me what kind of house they've been looking at? He hesitated, probably unsure if he should be spilling their private plans, but old habits die hard and charm still worked like a key. I laughed softly. Don't worry, Chase, it's nothing serious. Just a little housewarming gesture from a proud mother. I heard him smile through the line. Sure thing, Evelyn. They've been eyeing a place in the new Lakeview Estates, number 32, the one with the big glass front and blue shutters. I think they even put in an application already. Thank you, Chase. You've been very kind. That evening, I sat at my desk with a pen and my favorite leather notebook, the one with the initials YES embossed in gold. I opened to a fresh page and began to write names, dates, notes, details, all the little pieces that would come together in the end. My handwriting was still elegant, every loop deliberate. I'd always believed in the power of preparation. A woman without a plan is simply a victim waiting for her fate. I had no intention of being anyone's victim. The next day, I visited the Lakeview Estates office myself. The young agent, a man no older than my grandson would have been, gave me a charming smile and a brochure. We're expecting the Sterlings later this week to finalize the purchase, he said proudly. I returned his smile, calm and pleasant. Oh, I know. I'm Evelyn Sterling, Daniel's mother. I just wanted to look over the property myself. You know how mothers are, always curious. He nodded eagerly and offered me a tour. The house was everything I expected. Large, modern, soulless. The kind of place where laughter would echo off the marble floors, but never feel real. I walked through the empty rooms, imagining Madison arranging her designer candles, Daniel pouring himself expensive scotch, both thinking they'd outsmarted me. By the time I left, I had what I needed. The title wasn't yet finalized. The down payment hadn't cleared. The mortgage was still pending verification from Daniel's accounts. Perfect. I called Richard from my car. Richard, I'll need to set up a temporary holding company under Sterling Holdings, LLC. We'll use it to acquire property, discreetly. He didn't ask why. That was another reason I trusted him. Within 48 hours, the paperwork was complete. The house Daniel thought he was buying in secret now legally belonged to me. That evening, Madison called. Evelyn, you're not going to believe it, but there's been a mix-up at the bank. Our payment was delayed, and someone else placed a hold on the property. Isn't that just our luck? I smiled, my voice dripping sympathy. Oh, that's awful, dear. I do hope it works out. She sighed dramatically. We might have to start over. All that work for nothing. I let her talk, pretending concern, while inside me something dark and steady pulsed with satisfaction. Over the following weeks, I watched their frustration grow. Their perfect plans began to crumble. Delays, errors, miscommunications, all of them carefully orchestrated by me through quiet phone calls and invisible hands. I never raised my voice, never broke a law, never left a trace. But I turned every advantage they had into ash. Daniel came over one Sunday looking tired and annoyed. Mom, did you do something with the trust accounts? The transfers aren't going through. I looked up from my tea, calm as the garden breeze outside. No, dear. Perhaps you should call your bank. He frowned, running a hand through his hair. I did. They said something about pending authorization. It's all very strange. Maybe it's a system error. He looked at me suspiciously, and I smiled softly. You always were quick to assume I'm behind things, Daniel. Maybe it's just the universe reminding you to slow down. That night, I replayed one of my recordings. Madison's voice filled my study, sharp and cruel. She's ancient, Daniel. She'll be gone soon enough. Just keep her happy until the will clears. Then we can finally live. My hand trembled only slightly as I saved the file again under the folder labeled Final. The next morning, I mailed an envelope to Richard with a single note inside. Execute Plan B. He would know what that meant. I spent the rest of the week tending to my roses, reading on the porch, making sure everything appeared normal. Madison dropped by with wedding invitations and a forced smile. Evelyn, we'd love for you to say a few words at the ceremony. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the hunger in her eyes, the kind that devours love and leaves only greed behind. Of course, dear, I'd be honored. But while she smiled and handed me the invitation, she didn't notice the small glint of a hidden camera nestled among the porcelain figurines behind her. I didn't need words anymore. The truth was already mine, recorded and waiting for its moment. That night, I took out the last bottle of Merlot my husband and I had shared before he died. I poured a glass, lifted it toward the dark window, and watched my reflection, a 70-year-old woman with a quiet fire in her eyes. They thought I was fragile. They thought age meant weakness. But they had no idea what strength looks like when it's wrapped in patience. To tomorrow, I whispered. To the end of the game. I stopped walking and turned to face her. She looked smaller somehow, without her confidence or her carefully painted smile, just a frightened girl who'd been caught in her own trap. I almost pitied her. Almost. You have 5 minutes, I said coolly. Her voice trembled as she began. It was stupid. A joke that got out of hand. We were just talking. Daniel was stressed about money, and I said something awful I didn't mean. Evelyn, you have to believe me. I studied her, silent. The wind lifted her hair, and I saw the faintest tremor in her hands. For the first time, she wasn't performing. She was terrified. I wish I could believe you, I said finally. But people don't plot the death of someone they love. They don't laugh about it. Her eyes filled with tears. Please, Evelyn, I love Daniel. I love you too. I wanted to make a good impression. I made a mistake. We all do. You made a plan, I corrected softly. You conspired. You looked into the eyes of the woman who gave you everything and decided I was disposable. That's not a mistake, Madison. That's who you are. She broke then, truly broke. She fell to her knees in the parking lot, sobbing. I turned and walked away, my steps slow, steady, deliberate. There was no satisfaction in watching her fall apart. Only emptiness. Revenge is never sweet. It's cold, methodical, necessary. By the time I reached my car, I already knew the next step. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. I'd been careful. Every document, every recording, every message was organized and stored safely. I wrote an email to my attorney, Richard. Subject, estate update. I'd like to finalize the trust adjustments we discussed. Please ensure that all holdings are transferred to the Sterling Charitable Foundation, effective immediately upon my passing. The foundation didn't exist yet, but it would. A fund in my name to support scholarships for women over 50 starting new lives. My legacy would go to women who had been forgotten, dismissed, underestimated. Not to a son who saw me as a dollar sign. Over the next few weeks, I moved quietly. I sold off certain assets, liquidated investments, closed joint accounts Daniel didn't even know existed. I changed passwords, redirected mail, and removed his power of attorney. Every move was clean, invisible, legal. He wouldn't realize what I'd done until it was far too late. One afternoon, as I was pruning roses in the garden, Mrs. Bennet from next door called over the fence. Evelyn, dear, I just saw Daniel's car. Are things better now? I smiled faintly. Not better, I said. Just settled. She nodded sympathetically. You're stronger than I could ever be. I almost laughed. Strength isn't what keeps you standing after betrayal, I thought. It's purpose. And I had mine. That night, Daniel came again. This time, he didn't knock. He used his old key. I was waiting for him in the study. He froze when he saw me. Mom, we need to talk. You need to leave my house, I said evenly. He sighed, frustration flashing across his face. This is ridiculous. Everyone's talking. My job's on the line. Madison's lost clients. Do you have any idea what you've done? I raised an eyebrow. I protected myself. From your greed. From your lies. From your plans to bury me before my time. He stepped closer, anger rising. You think you're punishing us? You've ruined everything. No, Daniel. You did that yourself. I picked up a small envelope from the desk and held it out to him. This is what's left of your inheritance. A single check for $10,000. Enough to start over somewhere else. He stared at it like it was poison. You can't do this. Legally, you can't. I smiled faintly. I already have. He slammed his hand on the desk. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said quietly. But I'll sleep at night, knowing you won't profit from my death. He left without another word, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. I sat there for a long time afterward, the silence heavy around me. Then I picked up the phone and called Richard again. "It's done," I told him. He understood without me needing to explain. Months passed. Madison and Daniel's engagement ended quietly. He moved to another city, his reputation in tatters. She disappeared from society pages altogether. People stopped whispering. Time softened the scandal as it always does. I spent my mornings in the garden, my afternoons at charity meetings, and my evenings reading by the fire. My life was peaceful, but it wasn't empty. I'd built something new, not from spite, but from survival. One spring evening I received a letter. The envelope was plain, the handwriting familiar. It was from Daniel. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything. You were right. I lost myself. I let greed and Madison twist me into someone I don't recognize. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm trying to be better. I've started volunteering at a shelter. It's not much, but it's a start. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're happy. Daniel." I read it twice, then set it down. There were no tears, no relief, just quiet understanding. Some wounds don't heal, they just stop bleeding. I poured a small glass of sherry and walked out to the porch. The evening light glowed soft and golden over the garden. The air smelled of jasmine and old memories. 70 years had taught me many things: patience, endurance, and the fine art of knowing when to let go. Revenge had given me closure, but forgiveness, even quiet, private forgiveness, gave me peace. I raised my glass to the horizon, to everything I'd survived, and whispered to the wind, to survival, and to endings that finally feel like beginnings. They left the room with the sort of quiet fury that makes a house feel colder. Daniel's footsteps down the drive sounded like tiny detonations in my chest, though I told myself they were only the echoes of a life I no longer needed him to validate. Richard and I had crossed every legal T and dotted every I. The documents were airtight, the trusts were funded, the foundation's board was populated with people whose loyalty had been quietly confirmed. Everything had been done with the kind of patience that looks like inevitability when it finally lands. That night I sat by the study window and turned the house over in my mind as if it were a puzzle: rooms, people, motives. Revenge had been a slow surgery, precise and merciless, and in the healing that followed I had found a rhythm. Making tea, reading the newspaper, tending roses that no longer had to hide under offensive gossip. I slept with the lights slightly dimmed, like a person who had earned the right to small comforts. 2 days later, the first knock came at 11 in the morning, sharp, businesslike. I was in the kitchen, my hands deep in dishwater, when the presence at the door made the sink water go cold. A uniformed police officer and a man in a tailored suit stood on the porch. The officer introduced himself, then, with the polite firmness of someone carrying bad news, asked if they could come in. My stomach tightened in a way I'd not felt since Richard had first explained the trust mechanisms. The suit handed me a thin manila folder. "We have a complaint here alleging fraud and misrepresentation connected to a company called Solara Tech," the man said. His eyes were steady. "The complaint names you as a primary organizer. We'd like to ask you a few questions." My first impulse was incredulity. Of course Solara Tech had been a fiction, a legal construct, a lure. It had been built on legal precedent, on paper trails drafted and vetted by Richard. But the word fraud tasted sour on my tongue. I invited them into the study. I offered coffee, though my hands did not want it. My voice stayed even. "Certainly, but I think there's been a mistake. Solara Tech was a private investment vehicle created for members of the Sterling Circle," the suit finished. "We've had affidavits from several investors claiming they were misled. They claim fictitious investors, false projections. They're asking for a criminal investigation." I sat very still and watched the officer make notes. The morning light, through the blinds, etched lines across the desk. My mind, ever the ledger, began to tick off names: Chase, Gregory, and Linda Clark, other small players. We had stirred many pots. Perhaps one had boiled over in a way I hadn't predicted. I asked to see the affidavits. The suit handed me copies. There was a scribbled signature I recognized, a number that traced back to an address I had visited once at a fundraiser. One signature had a familiar tilt, My vision blurred for only a moment. "Do you have counsel present?" the man asked. "Richard is my counsel," I said, "and he's currently with me." I picked up the phone and called his office. The line rang. No answer. I called his mobile. Straight to voicemail. A cold little seed of dread unfurled. I answered the officer's questions as I always answered. Calmly, frankly, never offering more than necessary. I explained the structure, the holding companies, the notes that had been distributed. I explained the transfers and the legal reasons for each step. I told them I never misled anyone with an intent to deceive, that every document had been prepared by licensed counsel, and that investors had been afforded the opportunity to perform due diligence. The man in the suit left with a promise to be in touch. The officer left with a card and the regretful look of someone who knows an investigation will ripple outward like oil. After the door closed, I sat down hard in the study chair and waited for the world to stop spinning. It did not. That afternoon, a car I did not know pulled up in front of the house and a woman climbed out. Madison's mother, Linda Clark, her face still raw with the anguish of a woman who had lost not only money but her daughter's reputation. She did not come with rage this time. She came with the legal file folder I had just seen and the expression of a person who believes in the justice of paper and signatures. "You did this to my family," she said simply when I opened the door. Her voice was small and hard at once. "You set them up." "Mrs. Clark," I said, "please sit." I gestured to the parlor as if civility might hold the cracks together. She declined the seat and stood instead, fingers worrying the strap of her handbag. "You orchestrated the collapse. You funneled money through shell companies. You convinced people to invest. You made them trust you," she said, voice rising now. "Now you want sympathy because it all went wrong and—" her voice broke. She spat the last word. "People are calling the police." I did what any responsible fiduciary would do to protect assets. I said, I structured it so the estate would not be raided upon my death. I did it to prevent people from profiting off my end. That's hardly the same as criminal fraud. She looked at me as though I had told her the definition of betrayal in a new language. "My husband could be ruined, Miss Sterling. He's lost his savings. My daughter is gone. You don't get to—" her breath shuddered. "You don't get to decide when people pay." I swallowed. "I am not proud of the consequences you and your family now face. But you must understand what was said in that hallway. You must understand why I acted." Before she could answer, the front gate clicked. I had the strangest, reluctant hope that it might be Daniel, coming back with some pale offer of reconciliation. Instead, a courier left a black envelope on my hall table and retreated. Linda opened it with fingers that shook. Inside was a single photograph and a note in a hand that had, earlier, seemed practiced and poisonous. The photograph showed Richard, my Richard, walking into a low-lit restaurant with a man I did not recognize, a man whose profile was hard and familiar like a bruise. Behind them, the restaurant's hostess desk displayed a reservation card with a name I had not expected to see, Madison Clark. The note beneath the photograph had 3 words, written in ink that had bled like a threat. "He's in collusion." The world narrowed. Richard had been my anchor, a man who had spent 30 years steering wills through shark-filled waters. If he had colluded, if the man I trusted had been playing both sides, then the structure we'd built could be used against me in ways I could not foresee. Collusion suggested fingerprints, back-channel transfers, a bridge between my legal constructions and the real money that now screamed for reckoning. I thought of the anonymous letters, of the thin threats slipped beneath my door, of the voice that had written, "You took everything from us. Now it's your turn." For weeks I had assumed those letters were the desperate roar of someone I had wronged, Chase's brother, Madison's kin and angry investor. I had not allowed the possibility that the threat was internal, that the man I called friend and counsel might have a motive that required my ruin. "You have to tell me everything you know," Linda said. Tears had rimmed her eyes, not of pity now but of exhausted rage. "If you protected him, tell me. If you hid him." "He's not hiding," I said. The words came out steadier than I felt. "He's missing." A silence fell heavy and absolute. The house felt suddenly wrong, a room full of glass that someone had already cracked. I called the office number for Richard again. No answer. I tried the number printed for him on old letterhead. It went to a line that had been disconnected. At the bottom of my stomach a cold, Precise calculation began to form, the same kind of calculation I used to design consequences. If Richard had been compromised, then every document, every transfer, every fabricated investor could be called into question. If he had been threatened, perhaps the letters were not random cruelty, but part of a larger squeeze. If he had been taken, if he had vanished, then I stood both exposed and alone. There are moments, I have learned, where the mind must not fill in every dark possibility. They are moments best met with procedure. I walked to the study safe where copies of every contract, every recorded confession of Madison and Daniel, sat on a drive encrypted with a passphrase only I and Richard had known. My hand trembled as I punched in the numbers. The drive unlocked. The files remained intact. For the first time since this began, the knowledge that I had anticipated contingencies, made redundancies, kept copies in separate vaults, felt like a small, hard salvation. But having proof in a drawer and having the world believe you are not the same thing. That night, a sleek black car waited at the end of my drive. A different suit stepped out and approached the house. He wore no badge, but his eyes were the color of someone who kept lists. He introduced himself as a private investigator working on behalf of several investors. "You told me you had nothing to hide," he said, letting the words hang between us like a challenge. "We'll see about that." I poured a glass of sherry, braced my hands on the counter, and met his gaze. In the rose garden beyond, the night air smelled like the last of summer. Somewhere in the city, someone was pulling threads. Someone had decided this was no longer simply a family quarrel. Whoever that someone was, they had started a machinery that would not stop until it had chewed through reputation and law alike. As I closed the study door behind me, my old notebook waited on the desk. Names, dates, steps, contingencies. I opened to a blank page and began to write, because when the world insists on chaos, the only answer I have is order. I wrote down contacts, lawyers, the accounts where I'd seeded independent evidence. I wrote Richard's name at the top and underlined it twice. If the people who wanted me to be frightened thought they could rattle me into silence, they had misread what 70 years of life does to a woman. I had planned for greed and betrayal, but not for the peculiar geometry of a friend's betrayal, for the complexity of a man who might sell his loyalty to save himself. The night deepened. The house sat like a held breath. And somewhere, someone was going to call my bluff. A month after that dinner, the nights grew quieter. The house, though vast and beautiful, began to feel like an echo chamber, a palace of ghosts and memories. Sometimes I'd catch myself setting 2 plates instead of 1, pausing halfway, realizing no one was coming. I wasn't lonely, not exactly. Just aware of a silence. Silence has a way of amplifying everything. Every heartbeat, every thought, every regret. One afternoon, Richard stopped by with paperwork for a property transfer. "Everything's ready," he said, placing a folder on the table. "The foundation is officially registered. You'll be its first chairwoman." "Perfect," I said. "It's time my money did some good." He looked at me carefully, studying my face. "Evelyn, you've won. You've proven your point. You don't have to keep fighting." "I'm not fighting anymore," I said softly. "I'm teaching." But Richard wasn't wrong. Part of me had grown tired, not physically but spiritually. Revenge, even when justified, leaves a residue. You can wash your hands 100 times, but you'll still feel the stain. That night, I found myself wandering through Daniel's old room. I hadn't been there since before everything happened. His trophies still lined the shelves, his childhood drawings framed on the wall. For the first time in years, I felt something break. Not anger, not satisfaction, but a quiet ache. I sat on his bed and whispered into the emptiness, "You were supposed to be better than this." The next morning, a knock came at the door. Margaret was away on holiday. Richard wasn't due. When I opened the door, my breath caught. Daniel stood there. He looked older, thinner, harder, his once bright eyes dimmed. A faint scar ran down his jawline, a souvenir from prison. "I know I shouldn't be here," he said quietly, "but I had nowhere else to go." I didn't answer, just stepped aside. He walked in slowly, looking around as if the house itself might reject him. "I served my time," he said. "I've been sober for 6 months. I'm working again, nothing big, just bookkeeping for a local store. I'm not asking for money. I wanted to see you." I studied him, searching for deceit, for the boy I'd raised, for the man I'd punished. All I found was exhaustion. I wrote letters, he said. You never answered. I didn't need to, I replied. He nodded. I get that. I earned it. We sat in silence for a long while. The clock ticked. The wind rattled the windows. Finally, he said, I'm not here to beg. I just came to say I'm sorry. Not because I want anything, but because I can't carry it anymore. For the first time, his voice broke, not with manipulation, but with grief. I thought I could hate you for what you did, he said, tears gathering. But you were right. About all of it. About Madison, about me, about what greed turns people into. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to see your face once more. He stood, wiping his eyes. Goodbye, Mom. He turned toward the door. Something inside me, pride, pain, love, I don't know, cracked open. Daniel! He stopped. You should eat before you go, I said quietly. It's a long walk to town. He smiled, small and broken. You always did worry I'd starve. We ate in silence. Soup and bread, nothing fancy. It felt almost normal, almost. When he left, he kissed my hand, just as he used to when he was little. Take care of yourself, he whispered. You too, I said. After the door closed, I stood there for a long time. The air smelled like rain. I looked at the untouched letter he'd once sent from prison, still in my desk drawer. I picked it up. For the first time, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in uneven handwriting. Mom, if you ever read this, know that I understand now. You didn't destroy me. You saved me from myself. I love you. Always, Daniel. I folded the letter and held it to my chest. For the first time in a long while, I cried. Not angry tears, cleansing ones. The next day, I called Richard. I'm making one more change to my will, I told him. Half of what remains from my estate, when I'm gone, goes into a rehabilitation fund. For ex-convicts. People trying to rebuild. He paused. Including your son. Especially him, I said. Months passed. The house remained quiet, but it no longer felt empty. I'd made peace, not with what happened, but with who I'd become because of it. Strong. Unyielding. Human. One evening, I was out in the garden trimming the roses when I noticed a small box on the gate. No name, no note. Inside was a single pearl, smooth, white and familiar. My pearls. Daniel must have taken one years ago, a keepsake, a trophy I never knew. Now it was returned. I smiled faintly, tears stinging my eyes. I placed the pearl back in its velvet case and whispered to the night. Lesson learned. That was the last chapter of my revenge, not destruction, but understanding. They say vengeance is a poison. Maybe it is. But sometimes you have to drink it to survive the sickness of betrayal. As I stood there under the stars, I felt the calmest I'd ever been. No rage, no fear, just peace. The garden swayed gently in the wind, the scent of jasmine wrapping around me. And for the first time in years, I whispered something new, not to my enemies, not to my ghosts, but to myself. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's just the final move in a game I've already won.